So I think you've got this collision that's coming, that Trump feels like he needs the money, the tariff money, and he feels like the economy is doing well, the stock market's all-time high, he feels he's got leverage. Now, what I'm telling you is that everybody else right now, they think Trump is chicken. These countries believe that if they join forces, if they coordinate their responses, that they are going to force Trump to back down. You got a situation that is a disaster waiting to happen.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for July 21st through July 28th, 2025, while supplies last. First this week, we have a special on pre-1933 gold. MS62 $20 Liberty coins or MS63 $20 St. Gaudens coins
are just $90 over melt. Own a piece of American history at just $90 over melt.
Next, backdated 1-ounce Platinum Eagles are only $270 over spot. And finally, Dealer's Choice 90% Constitutional U.S. Mint Silver Dimes and Quarters are just 65 cents over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance. And back with us today is our good friend David Wu from David Wu Unbound, a former top Wall Street strategist. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back.
I know you really focus a lot on geopolitics, and we really haven't had you on since Trump became president, and kind of the whole scene has shifted in that regard. What is your take on the current state of the trade wars and how it's changing things geopolitically?
I think, first of all, listen, I was still two-minded about the way the trade war was going to play out until the big, beautiful bill passed 2 weeks ago, okay, in the form that it did. I mean, needless to say, everybody who follows the market knows that this bill was basically over the top. I mean, to the extent it's a very porky bill, is going to add an extra $3.5 trillion to the U.S. budget deficit, debt over the next 10 years. So from that point of view, this was much worse than I had expected. I'd expected the Freedom Caucus to hold a line on fiscal discipline. I thought that Andy Harris, the head of the Freedom Caucus, had a lot of leverage over Trump. I thought Trump was, a closet fiscal conservative. In fact, Trump always said that he was the biggest fiscal hawk in Washington. Of course, Trump was joking when he actually said that, because this bill was just, worse than anything you could possibly imagine, especially, with respect to the increase of the state and local tax deductions for, the blue states, California and New York. I mean, I don't even understand why Trump felt that had to be done, because that costs an extra $800 billion over the next 10 years. So if Trump could basically pressure, his own conservatives into giving in on, Medicaid and other issues, it didn't seem that he did anything to try to basically beat back the pressure from these very few Republican congressmen from the blue states that wanted this to happen. So, but nevertheless, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the fact is that, Elon Musk walked away and we ended up with this much worse, in a way, much more stimulative, basically, big, beautiful bill than, I was hoping for. And that in many ways has cemented the outlook for the tariff war. Now, you might say, well, what does one have to do with the other? It's very simple. Just think about this. From Trump's standpoint, he just gave huge tax cuts to waiters, to anybody working overtime, to seniors for their Social Security, essentially income, to corporates. He basically gave a tax cut to everybody. So from that point of view, I would assume that Trump thinks that the economy, therefore, can withstand the price shock associated with the tariff war a little bit better as a result. So I think the big, beautiful bill, the way it's actually, has been passed into law, will give Trump some comfort, to the extent that trade war is not going to push the U.S. economy into a recession. Okay? That's the first part. The second part, of course, is that because the bill is full of pork, the deficit is going to be much larger as a result. Guess what? Trump will now need every penny he can get from the tariff revenue to pay for his big, beautiful bill. And this is what I've been saying for the last 3 weeks, which is that Trump now needs the big, beautiful tariffs to pay for the big, beautiful bill. Okay. And then to the extent that, the big, beautiful bill is done, I mean, it's been signed into law, the deficit trajectory, is not going to change now. We can take that as a given. I would argue at this point, not only Trump doesn't have that much room in terms of backing down from his tariff, he probably feels somewhat emboldened by the fact that there's now stimulus that's going to provide some cushion to the economy. So therefore, I think that the market remains far too complacent regarding, August 1st, which is when, the deadline for the 90-day pause essentially comes due. Everybody and their grandmother, retail and institutional investors think, oh, well, Trump, he's a taco. He's just going to basically chicken out again. That, Trump put, just buy stocks because Trump is going to chicken out. He doesn't have the stomach to basically go through with his trade war and so on and so forth. I think not. I think that because of the big, beautiful bill, Trump needs the money and he thinks the economy can actually withstand it. And I would even go so far as to say that the whole Epstein thing, which Trump desperately needs to disappear. In fact, right now, a good way to, sort of get the newspapers to focus on something else other than his Epstein connection is to blow up the trade war, which is in a week. Okay. So I think from Trump's standpoint, I don't think that he feels like the market that he needs to, kick the can once again, in a week's time. Now, if you think about from the point of view of everybody else, now, I think with China, it's a different story because China, the deadline is, August 15th. We're talking about for everybody else. I mean, so far, Trump has reached an agreement with the UK and Indonesia. These are small deals. In Vietnam, these are tiny deals. We're talking about with the other major trading partners. That is the European Union, Japan, South Korea, Mexico, Canada, and the rest of them. In my humble opinion, I think these countries have gotten smart. What's interesting is that, when Trump in his first term, when it was relatively new, when people didn't know if he was crazy or he was just playing crazy, people were cautious in the way they dealt with him. Now, if you look at the political leaders in Europe, in Asia, and elsewhere, they think they can read Trump, fairly well. I mean, certainly the Wall Street, everybody on your show probably think that Trump is a taco. He's just going to give in. So do these people. They believe, the politicians, the political leadership in Europe, in Asia, and in Canada, they believe that Trump has no stomach for trade war. They believe that he's going to cave. Therefore, they're not going to, cut a deal with him at their own expense because they believe that he will fold, that he will blink. Okay. So therefore, and then more importantly, is the fact that Trump's favorite tactic, which was divide and rule, that hasn't been working very well for him. Because divide and rule means that you break one country at a time. And if you manage to break one country, then it's going to make it easier for you to break the next country. Okay. But right now, what these other countries have figured out, that is, the 20-something nations within the European Union, Japan, and all these countries, is that if we join forces, okay, we could literally, push back Trump much more effectively. So I think you got this collision that is coming, that Trump feels like he needs the money, the tariff money. He cannot have, because the U.S. deficit is going to blow up. Otherwise, he'll need every penny he can get from the tariff revenue. And he feels like the economy is doing well. The stock market's all-time high. He feels he's got leverage. Now, what I'm telling you is that everybody else right now, they think Trump is chicken. And on top of that, they believe that they now have the upper hand because they're now working with each other. And then if all of them gang up, not so much ganging up because it's Trump that's gone on the offensive, it's Trump that is the whatever, that these countries believe that if they join forces, if they coordinate their responses, that they are going to force Trump to back down. So this is why you've got a situation that is a disaster waiting to happen. So from that point of view, I do think, that August 1st is going to be a much more serious, I think, deadline than I think people realize.
Right now, as you mentioned, most stock indices are near or at all-time highs, even though this deadline is approaching. So you think it's going to be a really shock for the markets across the board?
Listen, I just so that, just in the interest, of transparency, I started to short, essentially the NASDAQ 100 this week. I mean, I established a short position, for the first time for a while, actually, when the futures market opened on Monday, and we'll see how it goes, but I think, generally speaking, I think there's too much complacency about what Trump is going to do, that there's this big Trump put in the market, that Trump wants to see higher stock market. And therefore, and I think also there is, to me, in fact, if anything, this is reminiscent of beginning of 2022. I would say that the closest historical parallel to what we're living through right now is 2022. You remember at the start of 2022, the stock market had a big, drop. And where I see the parallel is that, first of all, okay, at the end of 2021, okay, inflation started to rise. Nobody believed it. I mean, the Fed was telling us it was going to be transitory. Everybody thinks that, the Fed is going to be like keeping rates on hold for a very long time, and so on and so forth. I think right now, in a way, it's similar because, inflation numbers have come in fairly benign. Trump is pressuring, Powell to cut interest rates. So there's a lot, this is fueling, I think, a lot of the bullishness, I think, towards the U.S. stock market at the moment. The second parallel is that, like the end of 2021, when like every retail investor and their grandmother is basically chasing after meme stocks, now retail investors, their involvement in the stock market has not been this over the top, since 2021. Okay, that, this is no longer about, oh, wow, whatever. It's like, anybody who's got a few $100s, few $1,000, it's basically, throw in the stock market, let's go for it, and so on and so forth. So I think that the retail mania, okay, the dumb money, so to speak, I think is powering the stock market rally, which also makes it quite vulnerable to a sudden change in perception. And I think the third part of the, similarity is that in December 2021, Congress actually raised the debt ceiling, which led to a surge in issuance of treasuries. Okay. And then guess what? Congress just raised debt ceiling by $4 trillion, basically 2 weeks ago. And then guess what? We're going to see a big increase in issuance of U.S. government debt. Okay. So I think, it in a way, and then I think in general, like we'll see what happens here. But I think, last week, I think, the price action on, JP Morgan had better than expected numbers. The stock sold off afterwards. Netflix came in with better expected revenue. The stock sold off. I think a lot of good news is baked in. So I'm short right now, and this is a very opportunistic short because I'm thinking like I establish a short on NASDAQ 100 ahead of the Google earnings and then the Microsoft earnings next week as well. So I think the AI story is completely a bubble. So from that point of view, I am very happy, so from that point of view, I'm definitely not, I'm bearish the stock market, whereas actually, relatively speaking, I'm bullish gold. I'm actually long gold. So I'm long gold and I'm short NASDAQ right now.
Now, we've seen in the past, if you look at 2008 or the COVID crash, we saw gold obviously sell off during sell-offs in the stock market. So it seems like there can be events where it's, sell everything just because people are having margin calls and all that. So do you, I guess, not anticipate that sort of environment this time? Because it sounds like you're still bullish gold at the moment.
Right. I mean, I think that's an excellent point. I'm long gold versus the euro. Okay, so I'm not long gold against the dollar. I'm long gold against the euro because I think that if we were going to a major risk off, I think there's no doubt in the currency world, like everybody in the grandmother's long the euro. So if we're going to see essentially stop loss trigger position liquidation, I think the euro's got potentially more downside than gold. So I like that. I also like gold for geopolitical reason because I do think that I think, that over the next month or so, I think you will see a further escalation in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which I think can get actually quite scary. I think there is no doubt that, Trump is starting to come around to the realization that the war is not going to end on its own, at least not without one side essentially, overcoming the other. Okay. And I think when he said to Putin last week that, if the war doesn't end, essentially, if there's no deal in the next 50 days, he was going to hit Russia with tough sanctions. Now, I don't know if Trump meant it or not, but I think, my reading of the message from Trump to Putin is bring Ukraine to a heel in the next 50 days. I'm giving you 50 days to literally, essentially force, Ukraine to kneel. Okay? So I think that, so Trump doesn't care. I mean, he doesn't care who wins, who loses. The point here is that Putin is going to think that he's got 50 days to get it done. And this is why I think the Russian offensive, in Ukraine is going to seriously intensify. I think, we're now at that point of the war that, a few of the strategic strongholds in Ukraine are literally surrounded by Russian cauldron. And I think, as the situation worsens, I think it's going to increase the likelihood that Europe is going to get dragged into this in one way or another. Like already, like the Germans, the Germans and the Brits and the Germans and the French have already pretty much, got on the same page in terms of, essentially the placing troops on the ground in Western Ukraine in whatever capacity. I think, we're getting very close to that point. If things really start, because we're now at that point that a lot of people are going to potentially die. Because when Russia starts to go after these larger cities like, Kupiansk, like, Seversk, like Pokros and so on and so forth, there is, these are larger population centers, and it will get very bloody. And then the Europeans don't like blood, and therefore they're more likely to get drawn in. And that's super bullish gold, because geopolitical conflict is going to escalate. And that's great news for gold bulls.
And are you bullish also on silver and platinum at the moment? I know those have moved significantly here, but gold is the one everyone goes to. Silver, often the common man goes to afterwards, but platinum is really its own animal there. What is your perspective on those two other metals?
I think, platinum has a lot to do with, platinum, I don't really see it as a precious metal. I see more as an industrial metal. It's very important for catalytic converters and so on and so forth. In the industrial use, it's very important for platinum. And I think from that point of view, I think neither, and the silver's got problem with liquidity and so on and so forth. So right now, right now it's a sort of like we said, we're right now in the retail mania. Everybody believes that Trump is taco and he is going to chicken out, that there's a big Trump put now and he's going to pressure essentially the Powell to cut interest rate. This is why everything that retail guys buy go up. And I'm right now trying to basically pick my spot and bet that some dumb money is going to get stopped out. Now, but obviously, as you said, this is why I don't want to be involved in platinum. I don't want to be involved in silver. I think, for me, this is gold I could see, especially vis-a-vis the euro. So if you get a bit of geopolitical risk, and I think especially given the fact that, in the event of increased tension between Russia and Ukraine, and with Europe being dragged in, that obviously has to be viewed as being extremely bearish for Europe. There's no doubt about that. Okay. So I think from that point of view, gold versus euro, it's a nice way to actually express that view,
And I believe we've talked about on the channel before, there's this view out there that the BRICS have a huge amount of power. Obviously, they are expanding and are taking on more and more of the global population. And this has been a topic as the trade war has developed that has a lot of people have been talking about as kind of, you have the U.S. hegemony and you also have the BRICS, and a lot of the BRICS countries are accumulating gold, as we talk about gold here. Your perspective on that, I know you might have a slightly different perspective on that, but do you think the BRICS kind of threaten in any way U.S. hegemony?
No, I don't think so. I don't think the BRICS, I mean, listen, I mean, I think we're talking as though BRICS is like one coherent, essentially, group of countries. And it's not. I mean, in fact, there are more differences among them than there are similarities, I would argue. Yeah, sure. They generally speaking don't like the Americans so much. But then again, India, I don't know. Like, I think the Indians feel somewhat differently about the U.S. and then India, arguably, and China have been historically, the animosity between these two countries is greater than anything else. I think I don't think that is so much the story right now. I think BRICS is not really that important. I think Trump talks about it, but it's bullshit. I think right now a much more interesting story, is the fact that the European Union is now seriously considering joining the CPTPP, which is essentially a free trade zone that currently consisting of Japan, Mexico, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and a few other countries. Okay. These are like-minded countries. They're all, in favor of free trade. And the European Union is basically saying, we want to get away from the US and China. Okay. And one way for us to get some leverage against US and China is by joining forces with these other countries, because they can then create the biggest free trade zone in the world. And they can tell the Americans, the Chinese, we won't let you in unless you agree to play by the rules. Right. Because the fact is that while the Chinese are engaging in unfair subsidies, the US is now engaging in unfair tariff. So US and China are both hated by these countries. So these countries are now, and it's not about BRICS versus the US anymore. This is about, this is the beauty of the Trump presidency versus the Biden presidency. Under the Biden presidencies, the Americans, the worldview of the US is that, there are US and US allies on one hand and their adversary on the other. So the world was basically divided in that sense. There is US and US allies and US adversaries on the other. Trump doesn't look at it that way. Trump sees the world as us versus them, and them includes everybody, adversaries or allies for alike. Okay. So what is really happening right now is that, the US and China remain at odds. Now I kind of feel like the rest of the world are going to start to join forces and figure out how to deal with, to create this other leg. Okay. And I think if I'm right about this, this will be a very, very powerful development. Okay. And I think will be actually for the better of the world, actually, because they actually might put the kind of pressure on the US and China to doing the right thing. And that's actually a good thing, because right now the US and China are literally like, they are encouraging each other's bad habits. Okay. So in some sense, it will be good to have some positive influence.
And do you see this trade union there having any impact on the US dollar?
I think ultimately, it's bearish for the US dollar. Okay. Because in a way that, again, the European Union, in my view, they've been far too dependent on the US. Okay. Economically, defense and so on. So they got to start to think for themselves. And one way to do that is to move outside the traditional comfort zone to create alliances with other countries. I mean, the fact is that the head of the European Commission is going to be visiting Japan actually tomorrow. I mean, there's the EU-Japan summit that will be taking place this week. I mean, in fact, this is happening at a very critical time, a week before August 1st deadline. Again, I think that if Europe and Japan really combine their forces, their political capital, and then suck in the others like the Canada and then the Brazil and whatever of the world, UK, that will be I think that's very bullish, okay, for that part of the world. So yes, I do think that, let's put it this way, that will pose a bigger threat to the US dollar hegemony than BRICS, or than basically a hypothetical BRICS currency.
Well, very interesting. We'll have to continue to track this with you, David. Thank you so much for your time today. If our viewers are interested in learning more at David Wu Unbound, we'll put a link in the description of this video. Can you tell us a bit about your work there?
I used to run macro strategy at Bank of America. I retired 2020 to launch my own business. My whole entire shtick is that I want to basically help people see the world through the lenses of markets, because these days, everything's so political. You're either a Republican, or a Democrat, you're a Trump lover, you're a Trump hater, you're pro-China, or you're anti-US, whatever it is. I think, in order to disentangle all these, in order to isolate the reality from the political noises, there's nothing like seeing things through the lenses of Wall Street. It only cares about facts and numbers. And that's why I think, we can have interesting and very clear discussion about the state of the world through the lenses of numbers and facts. And that's why I think, in a way, if Wall Street actually serves any purpose in terms of, moving the needle in terms of the public narrative, I think this is where I'm hoping to actually do something about it. So if you're interested in what I do, I have pay service, but if you don't want to basically pay for it, I've got my YouTube channel, David Wu Unbound.
Fantastic. David, once again, thank you so much for your time today, and God bless.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for July 21st through July 28th, 2025, while supplies last. First this week, we have a special on pre-1933 gold. MS62 $20 Liberty coins or MS63 $20 St. Gaudens coins
Are just $90 over melt. Own a piece of American history at just $90 over melt.
Next, backdated 1-ounce platinum eagles are only $270 over spot. And finally, Dealer's Choice 90% constitutional U.S. Mint silver dimes and quarters are just 65 cents over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.